And we are muted. There, Sandy.
Very good.
I was just about to call you, Sandy, but here you are. So.
Right.
Hi, Gail.
Nice to see you.
On her side now.
Okay. All right, Gail, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Can you say something?
She spoke.
Your mic is off.
No, I think she's on.
No, I don't hear her.
Gail, can you say something?
Hi.
There we go. There we
Hi,
go.
Gail.
Good, good. All right, perfect. All right, so we're gonna get started. I just need to find the document on my computer, and we will get going. All right. So welcome everybody.
Welcome.
We are having Jewish learning. Very exciting. Okay. Okay.
This is nice because you can put your own ending because there's no right or wrong with clicking a vote. I like that.
It is.
Right.
This is going so slowly today. What is happening?
Maybe the Russians have gotten to it.
That's definitely what happened.
Very cute. Andrews Marston, what is this?
Was zu machen? Ist nicht gut.
All right, so we're going to turn to Pirkei Avot. Make this bigger. Okay. All right, we're getting there. All right. So last week, is that big enough, Phyllis?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Can you
All
see
right.
it okay, hon? Thank you, yeah. Come on over a little bit, Naomi, you can see it better.
I just want to say, I'm having problems today that are driving me up a wall.
Oh,
Sorry to
gotcha.
hear that.
I'm sorry. Does this make it any easier, Naomi?
Maybe we could find an
No,
answer.
there has nothing to do with Pirkei Avot.
I was just gonna say, maybe we could try.
Well, hopefully then, the fact that we're looking at Pirkei Avot will help a little bit.
I was just gonna say, maybe
Yeah.
we could find an answer in the Talmud.
Exactly. The Talmud often has something to say
If you
about
can figure
everything.
out why the American Airlines site refuses to accept one stupid little letter at the end of an incredible nightmare trying to book a flight.
Oh.
And just at the last minute will not take this
Oh.
leafy thing on my credit card. And this happens and happens and happens, and I am going up a wall over this.
Oh, I
It's
see.
making
Oh,
me
Naomi.
crazy.
And you.
It's making me crazy. I need to book this flight and it won't let me do it.
You will.
Oh.
It's a goddamn site is a nightmare.
We could do without the screaming.
Go back.
Okay, Naomi. All right. It's okay. Well, if you can calm down, it'd be very good to have you. And if it's too much, then you should do what you need to do.
I hate when that happens.
Oh.
I know. They won't accept something.
Yeah.
It's been one of the, I will say for myself, it's been one of the real benefits of pandemic that I've had no call to get on an airplane to go anywhere.
It was so
'Cause I
bad.
just,
I know, it can be a nightmare.
so I'm sorry for that Naomi's going through this. Okay.
Yeah, me too.
So last week we talked about Antigonus,
Yeah.
man of Sotho, right? We had a conversation about service, right? Very interesting conversation about the nature of what does it mean to serve, right? And the way that in Hebrew, right, the word for slave and the word for servant are the same, right? And so what kind of service do people owe to God, right?
I know.
And why do we partake in service to God, right? And then also this relationship, right, between serving God for love, right? Essentially, right, we serve God not because we're being paid, right? but because we have this relationship with God. We have this love for God, right? That is the motivation for a lot of why we live the way we live, right? On the other hand, Antigonus also says, let the fear of heaven be upon you, right? And we discussed that when we talk about fear in our tradition, right? It's not just sort of a fear like you would, you're afraid of dying, or you're afraid of dogs, or you're afraid of something, right? It's more about the awe, right? It's more about the sublime nature of the universe and the world, right? And so that the service that we render, right, is in part because we're just so awe-filled, right? And in part because of the way of our sort of gratitude and our love for the world that we get to live in. All right, so any final thoughts, questions about last week's conversation?
Well, let the fear of heaven, if that means you're doing it for a purpose and it should be awe, then it's mistranslated.
Well, it's not really mistranslated in the sense, I agree with you. I actually think that awe would be a better translation. And on the other hand, right, I would say that fear it's not only awe, right? That there is actually a sense of fear, and that God is more powerful than we are in the Jewish context, right? We might not agree with that, right? That might not be our theology, but a traditional theology will have God being so much more powerful than us that we have to deal with that. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
When did heaven become synonymous with God?
That's a really interesting
Wow,
question.
yeah.
That is early, I
Yeah.
think, because we already have in the Psalms, hold on, this dog really wants to get out. We already have in the Psalms the idea that heaven is for God and the earth God gave to people. So already we have this notion. And of course, it's not just a Jewish notion, right? It's a
No.
very common cultural idea that the gods live up there somewhere on Olympus, in heaven, right?
That's imagined.
I'm reading a book about ancient Ireland,
Okay.
prehistoric and early history. And the gods of the Celts live underground.
Interesting.
Yes, I heard that.
The God of
Interesting.
what?
Of the Celts
Yeah.
lived underground.
That makes sense to me in the context of English mythology of elves.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking about the fairies and
Oh, okay.
these are
These
other
are
gods.
other things. Okay.
Not Middle Earth.
These
Right.
are the Celtic gods.
Interesting. So, but again, it makes sense, right? That there is a realm
In
for
other,
humans.
not your Earth, yeah.
Then we need a realm that's not the human realm. And so there are places and of course in Greek mythology, right, the sea is a non-human place. So we have a god for the sea. The sky is a non-human place. And the underworld is a non-human place, right? So a lot of that. Okay.
I also read somewhere, I can't remember where, that when God made light, there was no difference between the light and the dark, and he had to kind of like draw a line to separate or something.
Right. That's
So
a very,
it all was heaven to begin with, and
it was all earth. It was all sea to begin with,
Sea.
according to the Jewish cosmology,
Yeah,
right? It was
that's
all
right.
sea.
Yeah.
And God divides the sea above from the sea below
yeah.
to make the sky, and then pushes the seas into various places so he can form the earth. Right. So, all right, great. So Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 4, Yosei ben Yoezer, a man of Zeredah, and Yosei ben Yochanan, a man of Jerusalem, received the oral tradition from them, Shimon and Antigonus. So what we have here in Pirkei Avot now will be a series of pairs, These are what they're called. There's two guys as opposed to one. And the two guys each will be in a kind of, they are said to have had different positions in the society of the Jews, right? So one would be the Nasi, that would be kind of like the governor, and the other one would be the Rosh Beit Din, or the Rosh Yeshiva, right? The head of the academy. Now, this is also kind of semi-mythological, right? It's probably not based on historiographical evidence. What the reality was is probably a little bit more complicated. Okay, so we will see here that they each used to say different things. So we'll read all of them, and then we'll go through them with the way we have them. Okay. So Yossi ben Yoezer used to say, "Let thy house be a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst." I love that, right? I love that image that you're going to sit in the dust and you're going to drink in their words. They're going to slake your thirst. Just all you need is the words of the sages. Okay, and then the second one is Yossi ben Yochanan, man of Jerusalem, used to say, "Let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of thy household. Engage not too much in conversation with women." Oi! I can just imagine what Sandy's going to say about this one.
You know exactly, because
Yeah, okay. They said this with regard to one's own wife. How much more does the rule apply with regard to another man's wife? Ay, 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 ay.
right.
Okay.
The whole position of women is abhorrent.
Well, it's an ongoing interesting question about this, I'm reading a book now, which really has an interesting take on this. I'm not sure if I agree or I not agree. I don't know, but it's interesting. From here, the sages said, as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself. He neglects the study of the Torah, and in the end, he will inherit Gehinnom.
Gehenna.
Yeah.
Hell.
Gehinnom, right? And Hebrew, Gehenna in Yiddish. Right?
It's hell.
What is it?
Hell.
Hell, yeah, so
Hell.
purgatory, right, hell, purgatory. So again, we see here that clearly there is concern for the afterlife. So when a Jew tells you, Jews don't believe in the afterlife, you can say, well, not so fast. Certainly there are many Jews who do not believe in the afterlife. Completely reasonable position to hold. And lots of other Jews certainly do believe in the afterlife. So there are as many opinions about the afterlife among Jews as there are opinions about everything else, right? Which means never-ending opinions. All right, so we'll get to the second one in a moment. Let's start with the first one. Okay, so what does Yossi ben Yoezer have to say for himself? How do we understand this one?
Well, he seems to believe in authority.
Yeah.
And a class distinction.
Class distinction. Interesting.
Well, doesn't the following one say, open your house to the poor?
Yes.
And this one says a house of meeting for the sages, for wise men.
Right.
So that you can learn.
Yes. So interesting, very interesting observation, Fran, that both want you to open your house to a slightly different group of people.
Very much so.
Well, that's what's interesting. Because yes, there are certainly sages who are represented in the Talmud, and I'm going to bring you a text. I think I will wait until I'm back. I'm going to be going on vacation in a couple of weeks, so I think I'll wait until I come back from vacation to bring you this text that brings out exactly this issue that Fran is talking about, meaning the wealth distinctions. what we would call class distinctions today,
Class, yeah.
but I'm not sure that that idea of social class was operative in those times. But because it was a feudal kind of society, right? There was no middle class.
I
So-
think that what Tanya said, men's only. I think they don't want no women in there, just the men's separately and the women separately.
Oh, well, that's a different issue, right? But I think the point is that there are poor people,
Yeah.
right? Working people who are sages, and there are very, very rich, almost semi-royal people who are sages. So being a sage is not necessarily synonymous with being rich or being poor,
Okay.
right? So it's not entirely clear what Yossi ben Eliezer says is diametrically opposed to Yossi ben Yochanan, right? But I think it is clearly different. Go ahead, Shirley.
And then he says, and sit in the very dust of their feet. Well,
Yeah.
he doesn't say who sits in the dust, but we do know that poor people sit in the dust.
Yes,
So,
right. Yeah,
But he means that the person who invites the sages in should sit at the dust.
exactly.
oh, okay.
Exactly. So now this is not my generally preferred way of teaching when I'm standing and everyone is sitting, but the idea, right, is that you show deference to teachers. So whoever said it's about authority,
I did.
very clearly that's true. That the sage who is the authority, his words should be seen like water. And that kind of imagery, words as water, is something that we see in the Bible, right? That the words of Torah are like a mighty water.
Well, here he's contrasting dust with water.
Yes. So what's going to relieve that dustiness? It's going to be, so you're going to get something from the sages by sitting at their feet. So this is, and it says here in this particular commentary that I have in front of me, it says disciples as a rule sat on the ground before their teacher. So this is
And the
all,
teacher would be in an elevated,
right. Teacher would either be in an elevated position like on a dais, or he would be maybe sitting in a chair, and his students would all be sitting around him on the floor. Imagine like the morning circle in kindergarten, right? Not always does the kindergarten teacher sit on the floor with the kids, right? Sometimes she sits on a chair because she's an adult and doesn't necessarily have the same flexibility to get up and down like the kids do. So I'm not, but I think what's interesting here, again, thinking about this as, on one hand, Pirkei Avot is a general idea about how a person should live. On the other hand, it very often reads, as we may have already discussed, it very often reads like a manual for rabbis. How should a rabbi live? So if we think about it from that perspective, it's very interesting that what is the rabbi supposed to do at all times? The rabbi should always be going and sitting at the feet of his own rabbi. So you always need to find someone who's going to teach you, which in the sort of rabbinic educational economy means that you will always be someone's rabbi and someone will always be your rabbi. So which is another way of saying, and I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that Yossi ben Eliezer is saying this, but I actually do believe this, right? That everyone has something to teach us. You learn really from everyone. And so you have to open your, metaphorically, right? If we get out of the realm of concrete life, metaphorically, you have to open your home to a whole range of sages. You have to go out and learn from everyone you can learn from.
Is home a synonym for the person?
That's an interesting question. Yehi beitcha veit ad lachachamim. So yeah, it's a house of a vad, a committee. So yeah, your house is, let your house be a house of meeting. Very interesting. So, I mean, I actually do think that the word bait often is a synonym, it's not just a house, it's a structure. It's often a household. It sometimes is understood as the wife of. I've got to go check in with my household, right? He's going to go ask permission from whom? From his wife. Or he's going to ask his wife to give him some advice about, we'll see this in the story that I'm going to bring you from the Talmud, right? Someone gets an offer and he says, I can't make that decision without going home and consulting with my wife. So it can mean household, right? But I do think that it from a metaphorical perspective, right? It's sort of like you open yourself up to all these teachers, sit at everyone's feet, right? And listen to everyone, take everyone's words, anyone whom you consider a sage, right? Anyone whom you consider a wise person. So be open to them, right? And only there will you find true, your thirst will be really alleviated. All right, good. So shall we move on? Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Phyllis.
No, I said, why not?
Okay, let's keep on going. All right, so here, let's now we're going to get in trouble, right? Yossi ben Yochanan is trouble, right? So the first part we like. Right? We like this part. Let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of thy household. So what does he mean by that?
You feed them?
Yes, right? You're always looking to feed the poor. Right? You're always looking to take care of a traveler, of a person without food, a person without a house. You're supposed to, so from this we get this very important concept in Judaism, right? Of that we are always going to take care of the poor in the community.
It's amazing how he makes the leap in the next sentence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm not sure. So it's very interesting. The leap, right? Engage not in too much conversation with women.
Yeah. A little bit of discrimination runs all through the chapter.
Maybe.
I would use the word temptation.
Yeah, I think that's the issue here, right?
Yeah.
Al tarbei sicha im ha'isha, right? So I think what this is about, right, is not, and I think this is what's interesting about this, right? When in the time that this was written, right, there were clearly two realms, right? There was the male realm and there was the female realm, right? And men hung out with the men and the women hung out with the women, right? And we obviously have exceptions to this rule all over the place, right? Yeah. Our patriarch Jacob, right, and his brother Esau were opposites, right? Esau was a man of Isaac, right? He was an outdoorsman, he was a hunter, right? He liked action movies, so on and so forth, right? But his brother Jacob was an Ish Tam, right? He was a smooth guy, and he spent all of his time with Rebecca. In the sort of context of the culture within which that was written, that would be seen as rather strange. Right? So the issue here, I think, that Shirley is getting to something, right? Which is, it's not about women as women, right? It's about women as what kind of sicha, what kind of conversation does one have with women?
Because women, if your purpose in life is to study Torah, and women were forbidden to study Torah, then what else is there to talk
Well,
about?
right. Well, so you're getting on to something, Fran, right? Which is very important. The conversations you're going to have with your wife are going to be about the children, the household, maybe what you do at night, right? About your sex life. It's not, as Fran says, going to be about Torah study. The exception will be when your wife also studies Torah.
Is that allowed?
And that's well, it certainly is. I mean, we certainly have examples in the Talmud of very learned women, right? So, and rabbis in the Talmud talk to women all the time, right? And they, especially if they are learned women, right? So I think that here, so this gets me to the point that I was gonna that I mentioned before, that I'm reading this book about Talmud study, which actually would be an interesting book to read, sort of as a like a book club book for a group like this. It's called If the Seas Were Ink by a woman named Ilana Kersham. And I haven't read the whole thing yet, but she basically says that as she begins to read the Talmud, she does what's called Daf Yomi, which means the folio of the day. So in the Talmud, I'll show you what the Talmud looks like. Each page is only half of a folio. Right? Each page is only half of a folio. So this is Kaftet, folio 29.
Mm-hmm.
The first side is side Aleph, and the second side is side Bet. Right? So the idea is you read one daf of Talmud every day. So she starts doing this, right? You can't go into very much depth if you're reading a whole, you can spend a whole year on a daf if you weren't careful. So she says that she realizes that she's not a woman in the way that the Talmud conceives of a woman, right? She's more like those learned women in the Talmud, right? So that the sort of category of woman in the Talmud is no longer active today in the same way, right? In at least in non-Haredi contexts, right? Because we generally in our society, contemporary Jews by and large educate their women and their men similarly, right? There's not a big distinction. So anyway, the point is, right? Don't spend too much time on your household matters. Right? So remember what I said, right? That very often we use bite as a synonym for wife, which means that we can use probably the same, we can go backwards, right? That wife is also a synonym for house, right? So don't spend too much time talking about your household stuff, right? Get out there and study your Torah. All right, so, and how much more does the rule apply with regard to another man's wife? What's that about?
Is there any sense in which, when you're told or you emphasize the study of the Torah, it's something that you do on your own as opposed to listening to the sages?
Very interesting. That's a great question. And it actually is relevant in this context, right? Because if you're talking to your own wife, or even worse, to someone else's wife, right? The clear implication of don't spend too much time talking to other people's wives, right? Is because people are going to think that you're engaging in something more than talk, right? And so, and it, very interesting here, right, as you point out, Phyllis, that this not talking with women, right, is what's opposed to that is talking about Torah, right? Because what is Torah study? Torah study, by and large, then was not a lot of poring over texts, right? It was much more conversation, right? Torah, and this is what's very interesting about the first one, right? This first one that we read, right, about bringing the sages into your house, right, is that in a sense, right, the sages themselves represent Torah.
Yeah.
Because they are the repository of Torah. So it's sort of like if you take the Torah scroll, you don't put the Torah scroll down on the floor with you, right? You put the Torah scroll in an exalted position because it's a symbol of the Torah. And so in the context of this Mishnah, the sages are the symbol of the Torah. And they become this, what's the word I'm looking for? The vessel, right? The vessel of wisdom. All right. All right, so let's look then finally at this one, right? So if he talks too much with women, he causes evil to himself. Gorem ra'a la'atzmo. He brings evil upon himself. Uvotel midivrei Torah, and neglects, right, or makes them. And neglects is right, but I'm trying to think. Let's see how they translate it here. Yeah, neglects. But levate la means in vain. Like if you make a blessing levate la, that means you're doing something that's not necessary. It's more than just neglecting it. It's also kind of misusing it, right? It's almost kind of misusing it. You're gonna waste, in a sense, words of Torah, and in the end, in his end, the sofo, yoresh gehinom, he will inherit, right? Literally, he will inherit. Right? Yerusha is like what you've inherited from your parents. You will inherit Gehinom. What's Gehinom? All right, so here's a note about Gehinom. Literally, the valley of Hinnom, situated southwest of Jerusalem. In the days of old, it had been the scene of the savage rites connected with the Canaanite worship of Molech, to whom children were sacrificed. The name became a term for what is loathsome and horrifying, and popular belief in later times identified the locality with the place where the dead expiate their sins. The name is the opposite of Gan Eden, which is paradise, like the Garden of Eden. So very interesting. So on one hand, it can be sort of seen as hell on earth, right? On the other hand, there is a sense, I think, in the rabbinic, the rabbis were not really hellfire and brimstone types, so you weren't going to necessarily rot in hell forever. They were more like you have to spend a certain amount of time in Gehinnom, and then you can go to paradise. All right. Any questions on this one? Should we move on to another? Got one more? Okay. All right. Give me a second. I got to go find it.
So much of that antipathy / fear / separation between men and women exists to this day among Orthodox Jewish people,
100%.
including touching of the hands,
Yeah.
shaking hands if you're not immediate family.
Exactly. But that's for a different reason.
Is it?
Yeah. Give me 1 second just to find this, and I will be right with you. Somehow I'm. Where did he go? Where'd you go, mister? There it is. I was looking for a vote, not Pirkei vote. Okay. All right, so that's for a different reason, right? So that is all connected with ritual purity. So ritual purity has to do with the fact that that a man and a woman should not touch if she is having her period,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And since you don't ask, are you having your period? Right? It's not, you just avoid touching one another.
Okay, I didn't
Right.
realize that.
And there was a parallel kind of ritual impurity that men used to be held to. If they had had a seminal emission, they were impure, and no one should touch them. And until they went to the mikvah, right? But in that sort of typical patriarchal fashion, what was inconvenient for the men was dropped, and what was, on the other hand, what I'll say about tahara, right? About the practice of mikvah for women, right? Is that from the people that I've spoken to who are in the Orthodox community and actually practice nidah, that it's actually a very, very good way of increasing fertility, and B, also it's a great sort of regulator of your marriage, right? That you have periods when you're not supposed to touch, and you have other periods when you are davka supposed to touch, right? And so it does have a tendency to increase, on one hand, verbal intimacy, right? Because you're not touching one another, so you spend a lot of time together in conversation. And then on the other hand, you've sort of built up a lot of desire by the time it's time to touch each other again. So go ahead, sir.
I was in Jerusalem in '83, so I was a young woman, right? And I was walking from my girlfriend's parents' house back to the hotel. I was by my side, and it was Shabbos, Friday evening, and a young man comes walking by, a Hasidic with the peyach in the hat and the black outfit, and he literally turned his head this way as he walked by me. Wouldn't even look at me.
Right, wouldn't even look, and that's a very common thing,
Yep.
right? And whereas in our culture, that can be perceived as rude,
Rude, yeah.
right, and misogynist, right? In the context of that culture, it's seen as ultimately the most respectful, right? That you're not going to even look at someone because, God forbid, you have a sexual thought, right?
Yeah.
It's not I don't get it, but I do try to respect that, because it's they do have a fairly strong belief in that. So it is very interesting, and actually, Fran, you may remember we talked about the guy who used to make the shoes for the prostitutes,
Oh, we
yeah.
discussed
right?
that
And,
one day.
right, and
yes.
he wouldn't even look at them, right?
Yeah,
He would
wouldn't-
serve them, right? He would provide shoes for them,
Reminiscing,
right?
Yep.
but he wouldn't look at them, right? Which is a way of saying that he is not going to treat them as sexual objects. He's going to treat them as people, right? Which is a very, I'm sorry?
A mark of respect.
A mark of respect.
In that particular context.
Exactly, and davka, and specifically, right? They are sex workers, right? These are sex workers who in general don't get a lot of respect in the world, right? And who are the people that tend to have a lot of respect for sex workers? Are people like Jesus of Nazareth, right? And this rabbi, right? Not necessarily what you'd expect. All right, so let's continue. All right. So Joshua ben Parachia and Nitai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. Joshua ben Parachia used to say, "Appoint for thyself a teacher, and acquire for thyself a companion, and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor." This is one of the really, for my mind, this is one of the really good ones. This is one of the ones that's really sort of, if we have to say timeless wisdom, right? This is one of them. And Nitai the Arbalite used to say, "Keep a distance from an evil neighbor. Do not become attached to the wicked, and do not abandon faith in divine retribution. So here we go, right? We've got more fear of God. And this is like really clearly Old Testament fear of, I can see you're struggling with your eyes. Phyllis, let me turn off the lights.
Is that what it is?
Let me close this, maybe this will
What a
help.
difference when the lights are
Yeah,
Yeah.
off. I'm
That
wondering
was
why
hard.
I'm squinting.
I didn't realize how harsh that was.
Oh, yeah.
Coming right down at you. Yeah,
Yeah, see,
Absolutely.
I can't see
Yeah.
what.
yeah, it's interesting.
Sorry, I didn't think of it before.
That is better.
All right. All right. So, yeah, do not abandon. So clearly the Old Testament fire and brimstone God is around here somewhere, right? It's definitely not
Alive and well.
alive and well. Okay. All right. So this first one, right? What did John, so we probably might only have time for this one. Let's see how we do. Yehoshua ben Parachia, Omer Aseh lecha Rav, Ukne lecha Chaver, Veheve dan et kol ha'adam lechaf zechut. Okay. So I'll read it in the other translation. Provide thyself a teacher, get thee a companion, and judge all men charitably.
So by companion, does that mean a study partner?
Probably. Although, right, I think it is in this case a study partner, but I would also say, right, that, and this is another reason, right, why it's not so much that I think I said before that the Talmudic category of women doesn't really exist anymore. What I would say is the Talmudic category of woman has been generalized, right? It's been expanded, right? So like my chavruta, my study partner is a woman, right? So that, in the past, that would be very rare. Today, in Jewish circles, it's increasingly common, right, for women to be rabbis. But aseh lecha Rav is the first one, right? So literally make yourself, right? The other translation is provide yourself, right? Find a teacher, right? As regards Jewish stuff. But it's not just a teacher, right? A Rav is more than a teacher, right? The word is master. Rav really is also master, right? Which is an awkward word these days, right? For a lot of reasons. But again, when we sort of, again, think about service, right? It's the Rav is often whom you're serving, right? That you are, this harkens back to the previous Mishnah that we looked at, right? How are you supposed to treat your teacher, right? You're supposed to bring an apple for your teacher, right? That there's a way in which you are going to serve the teacher so that the teacher can teach you, right? You're going to pour water for your teacher so that the teacher can pour the water of his Torah into your mouth, right? Yeah, go ahead, Phyllis.
Well, the idea of master as teacher is very lasted a lot longer than here. I mean, in the guild system, the master was the teacher.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And it's so interesting, right, that the one of the first Mishnahs, maybe even the first one, said, right, go out and find a lot of disciples, right? Go out and find a lot of students, right? But you can't have students, right, unless you have a teacher. But it also means, but I think it's also sort of even more than teaching and even more than sort of master servant kind of thing, right? It's also that this person becomes really an example of how to live. Right? And it's more than just knowledge that he imparts to you, right? It's really about the whole way that you exist in the world.
Wasn't Is it Rav, like R-A-V?
Yeah.
Is that similar to a Rebbe?
Yeah.
Like the hub of the community?
Yeah.
So it's not only in matters of Torah, it's an example of good living, of advice about life matters.
Exactly. And it's great. So for instance, the rabbi, the Chabad rabbi in Dnipropetrovsk, that, you know, where I used to spend a lot of time in Ukraine working with this Chabad community. I worked for CJP, the Boston Federation, and we had a partnership with that Jewish community. And so we would spend a lot of time going over there, and we would bring people from Boston, and they would learn that he's that kind of rabbi that offers you a blessing and then good things happen, right? So, you know, he would offer blessings to people so that they should have a baby, so that they should find a husband, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't work, right? You know, whatever. But that's exactly right? You go to the rabbi not just to get a Torah lesson, right? You go to the rabbi because you can't get pregnant, right? And you go to the rabbi because you can't find a bride.
And I have it on good authority that it is alive and well in Crown Heights in Brooklyn.
Oh, 100%.
Oh, yes.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no question at all, right? So this is sometimes difficult for people to sort of fathom, I guess, is that it's not. So when in many Orthodox circles, right, people won't do something until they've checked with their Rav,
Absolutely.
right?
Mhm.
Right, and this is why, right? And it's not only, or it's not necessarily, right, that they can't make the decision themselves, right? It's sort of like what I said at the beginning towards the beginning of the hour, right? Like you get offered a job. Do you just take the job, or do you go home to your wife or your husband to consult about that decision before you make it, right? And I think a lot of the times that's what that kind of conversation is. What should I do? I'm at this crossroads in my life. What do? I need to talk, you know, some people need to talk to their shrink, right? Some people need to talk to their spouse. Some people need to talk to their dog, right? And other people need to talk to their Rav. All right. But just as important, right, is to find yourself a companion.
What kind of companion?
Well, that's a great question. So Fran already asked me, right? Should it be? Are we talking about a chevruta? Right, a chevruta is a study partner,
Yeah.
right? Probably it is that, but it's probably more than that, right?
Could it be a life partner,
I
a
think
spouse?
I think it could be, right? That
Yeah,
one
that's what-
one of the
Yes?
I was
I
wondering.
think so. I'm not going to say. I don't want to go on a limb and say that's what Yehoshua had in mind. But I think it does, right? Because one of the primary commandment in the Torah, right, is pru u'revu, right, which is to go forth, you know, be fruitful and multiply, right? So a man can't make a baby on his own.
What's the Hebrew word they have for companion?
It's chaver.
Oh,
Chaver.
Oh, doesn't that mean friend?
It means friend.
Yeah.
It means friend, right?
yeah.
But which is really interesting, right? That friend can have a whole range of meanings, right? And chaver can as well.
Was contemporary interpretations at that time and in the centuries following, what does that say?
I mean, I'm not sure I understand your question.
The definition of companion in that context.
Oh, in this context.
What does contemporary learned people of that
Of this time?
that time
Yeah.
and in the centuries immediate following, what's the interpretation?
I mean, I think it's friend. I think it's more than just a study partner, right? And I think that actually it is interesting that a study partner often does become a very good friend, right? It's not one of my closest friends from rabbinical school is still my chavruta, right? Because the conversations are not just dry conversations about the learning,
Become personal.
right? But they're extremely personal, right? Because it's not a question about, okay, he was the guy that I sat and learned physics with, right? The conversations when you get into conversations about Jewish stuff, right? It gets to your own practice, it gets to your own theology, your own sense of the world, that your own sense of what's the right way to live, right? And so when you have that kind of intimacy with a friend, right, that really builds a solid foundation of friendship. So I do think that they kind of go together. So an ideal friendship in the Jewish context, as presented here, right, is a friend you learn Torah with, right? So and again, this is another example of the way that once women are learning Torah to the same extent that men are, right, then we don't need to make that distinction, right, between men and women, right? So you can be your rabbi, right? Your master can be a woman. Right? Many of my rabbis are women. The rabbi who did my conversion is a woman, right? So that's been a very important part of my Jewish development, has been the Torah that comes from women. Yeah, go ahead.
Don't they, following that and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor, are they speaking about you also have to respect this companion
Yes. Well, right. I mean, I think that this is one of the most powerful.
and trust?
This is one of the most powerful tools that I've found in my own life, right? Which I would translate it, maybe not with these words. I would say something along with always assume good intentions.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
When you're judging another person, always assume that they're coming with good intentions, right? And not with bad intentions, right? And which is surprisingly hard to do. Just like it can be surprisingly hard to find a rabbi. It's not always so easy to find a rabbi, right? Maybe you don't like rabbis, right? Or maybe the rabbi that is available to you is not someone you feel like you can talk to, right? So finding a rabbi is not, and finding a real friend is not always so easy. Right? And it's also, but it becomes a little easier to find a friend when you do have the capacity to judge people based on assuming good intentions, right? Which is, since we don't have, this is all we have about when we look at other people and their behavior, all we have is their external behavior. Right? We can't see into their brains, right? And we, of course, can see into our own brains. So we know, right, that we don't always have the best intentions, right? So we kind of put that onto other people, even though it might not be entirely reasonable to do so. All right, good. So let's end there. Next week we will continue with Pirkei Avot, and then I think next week I think is the last week we are going to have. I think next week is the last week we're going to have Jewish learning. The following week, I'm out on. This is so crazy. So on the 16th, I'm busy all day, and then I'm going out for 2 weeks. So
Wow.
yeah,
Good for you.
yeah. So next week will be our. I have a all day retreat next week. Not next week, the week after. So next week we can continue with Pirkei Avot, or we can do something completely different. Do you, any preferences?
Well, I'm here because the content interests.
Yes. Well, the content is fascinating. So
Yeah.
I'm always happy to continue with this. So let's just do this one more week, and then we'll revamp. When we reconvene in July, we'll see where we're at.
Oh, we won't reconvene till July.
Exactly, because I'm out for this retreat on the 16th. Then I'm going out, and I will be back. I think I'm going to be back on July 6th.
Wow.
Yeah, it'll be a long.
So we're having a Friday service here, right?
Yeah, the services will still happen. The services
Okay.
will still happen.
Rabbi Rachel will do them.
With Rachel. This week we're in Goldman. This week the services are at Goldman
And then
and
next
on
week,
Zoom. And then next week, it's our bar and bat mitzvah. So
Oh,
big party.
so is that going to be upstairs?
It'll be on, yeah.
Nice.
Oh,
And
nice.
Saturday mornings are always gonna be upstairs because
Oh,
I love
it's
it.
so much of a nicer room
It
to be
is.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Friday nights, we
And a
can't,
bigger screen.
what?
And a bigger
And
screen.
a bigger screen, exactly, a bigger screen, and a bigger screen. And,
And how many are getting to be bat mitzvah?
it looks like it's been 9.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
We have 12 or 13 in the class, but not everyone. Some people are shy, they don't wanna
Oh,
be,
but it's a lot of fun. I was a Benot mitzvah, so
Yeah.
I loved it.
it's been so, we've had such a good time. We really have had a good
That's
time in the
nice.
class, yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So I would love to do it again, since a lot of people might have done it had it been in person. I think I'll try to do it in person.
That would be nice.
And you know, because I learned a tremendous amount by doing it. So it's always great to do these courses.
That's
because
good.
I learned so much. So even from a selfish perspective, I'm happy to do it.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great to see you. Let me turn the lights back on.
Ah,
There's no.
This chair makes so much noise.
His sweetheart.
You happy now? Are you happy now?
Oh,
No,
we're-
she still wants to go out.
She's right, because she wants to get to Masano.
Before she goes
I
home.
want to tell you
Yeah.
that Allison is pregnant.
Oh. Which Allison?
The one that you did
Excuse
the
me.
Irish
Oh,
blessing
sorry.
for,
It's
the
okay.
Orthodox Jewish granddaughter.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it's a very happy.
Look who's came from hiding down.
Hey, hi, Clara.
Yeah.
How you
She
doing?
wanted, Orthodox, she wanted 6 kids. She'll be lucky if she has
It's
one.
one.
Wow.
Wow. Oh, I'm so glad to hear it.
Yes.
Great. That's
Wonderful.
wonderful.
Let's hope everything,
We'll just keep on praying. We never say Mazel Tov about a pregnancy. We
that's
always-
what she will not allow.
Right,
that.
we always say B'sha'a Tova.
What does that mean?
B'sha'a Tova means they come at the right time,
Ah,
right? Because you
Aw.
want everything to emerge in the proper season.
We do.
Yes. Oh, you're good. You're a good. You're a
oh, God, yes.
Yes.
she
you're a
is.
good.
Good
She
girl.
kept coming over and looking up at
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
She wants all the attention.
I know, I noticed when I'm sitting here, she came up to me. I
Yeah.
know.
She wants all the attention.
Yes. I'm not crazy about dogs. Certain dogs I do like, and some dogs I don't.
Oh, yeah.
I got a reason why I don't drop the dog up and bite out.
Oh, yeah, I was bitten by a dog as a kid. Oh,
Is
it
it
took me
happening?
a while to get over
Yeah,
it.
me too.
Yeah.
I still don't like
Just to
dogs.
get over
I'm
it.
getting good at it.
All the good
I
stuff.
don't like big ones anymore, because it
Oh,
was
the
big,
big
it was a big
Yes, you're a
dog.
good
Oh.
boy.
I had a white dog. My father said, no, I said, no thanks. I was like, I can't use some dogs.
Yes, I think you're a good.
I'm gonna be here 5 years in office.
I know, it's amazing, Hetty.
Isn't
It's
it?
incredible,
It
huh?
is. No, I don't believe it.
In August, when we get to August, that's gonna be my 6th anniversary here.
6, yeah.
Yeah, end of July will be my 6th anniversary.
End of July, I'll be here. I retire 3 years then, end of
Yeah.
July. Wow. The time
My
flies. I
time
still
just goes,
believe it.
zoom, zoom, zoom.
Tell me about it. I said, oh,
You good dog.
yes.
But just watch us.
He just observes.
That's what he does.
Yeah. He's
I
wary.
wonder what's going through his head.
I often wonder that, because he seems sometimes to be so impatient, and I'm like, where do you want to go?
Oh,
Why are you in such a hurry to get to the next place? It's going to be the same as this place.
wow.
Nothing else, nothing new going on out there. Oh, big stretcher, big stretcher. Want to see this one?
Oh,
Oh. I'm just gonna make sure the door is closed.
good idea.
So she can't run away.
Ah,
Yes.
she's a good boy.
Of course, I know exactly where she's gonna run to.
I do too. Like all the dogs. Knows where to go to, right?
Exactly.
She knows what she's doing, Lysano.
She's no dummy.
No. You get a little jealous because I'm having Puck, don't you?
Yeah.
But Puck doesn't seem to mind that people pat you.
Yeah.
Good dogs, good dogs. Well
Okay.
behaved, well trained.
They're cute. Well, they're sometimes they're well behaved.
See, look at this. He's following you.
She really wants to get out. You're not going out.
Okay.
Sorry. All right, see you soon.
Thank you, Grandma.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.